In a way, it seems that what you're saying here is that proposing is that it's always been a business of instability and disruption, and that it always has been a business that regenerates itself, it grows. I mean, this is, I have to think there's a lot of resistance to that.
Sweeping generalization from history. Journalistic vacuums usually get filled. They don't get filled instantaneously, and sometimes mostly the regeneration will be slower than people would like it to be. But to believe that regeneration isn't going to happen, you have to believe that the hunger for news and the idea about the value that news can have is not an embedded idea. And it seems to me that recent experience suggests that actually, at least in North America and Europe at the minimum, it is a fairly well-embedded idea. Now, if you're discussing Russia or China or something, that's a slightly different question. But in the kind of places that are the center of this debate, I think those ideas are fairly well embedded.
Well, we've got two other folk here who teach journalism, among other things, Stephen and Sheila, right?
Yes.
Your thoughts, Sheila? I mean,
I confess to doing that.
Yeah, you. What are you telling your students? What are you hearing from them, and what do you see as a long-time successful practitioner?
Well, the other night I was in hipster Brooklyn, and one of the people I met there was a 28-year-old African American, and he's the editor for BuzzFeed for the LGBT section. And he has 6 reporters working under him, including one who is a foreign correspondent looking at LGBT issues around the world. So can you imagine the New York Times or the New York Post or any major newspaper having an LGBT unit, much less an LGBT reporter? So what I'm saying is there are new audiences now that are going online, and these new news organizations, speaking of disruption, are finding these new audiences and engaging them in new ways. And part of what you said today, the Pew report that was released today was sort of a guarded optimism, saying there are these new news organizations finding new audiences that were never served by what was the media before, using new ways of storytelling and new ways of engaging the audience. And it's really not new because, this has happened before, as George says, the founder of my school. Sorry about this, I'm in the other journalism school I'm teaching uptown. Founder of our journalism school, Joseph Pulitzer, was a disruptor himself. He was a Hungarian immigrant, he was an outsider, and he introduced innovations in storytelling and design and presentation as well. Sort of lurid headlines, big illustrations, talked about crime, didn't talk about weighty matters of public policy, but he brought, the everyday reality of people's lives and reached out to new audiences in that time, the late 19th and early 20th century, the new audience of immigrants who were coming to the cities. So it's sort of a pattern here, as we see, and as you say in your book, so recurring. So I'm telling my students, it's great to be in a period of disruption because you have a chance to innovate and reinvigorate and reinvent journalism.
One of the things that's confusing about this moment in history is that we are in a period of abundance in a lot of ways in news. We have more choices than we've ever had before, more volume, more articles, more sources, more writers, more ways of telling stories. It is easier to publish stories. The cost of publication have gone from being a millionaire to 0. That's a rather remarkable drop. In so many different ways, the system is more democratic and more open than it has ever been. And yet, I do think that there are pockets that are very worrisome and not getting better. And they're obscured by how much really wonderful regrowth and innovation there is. And I think it's really useful to be as precise as possible about what the problem is and isn't. The problem is not content. The problem is not news. The problem is not even journalism. I would say the problem is something much more specific than that, which is what I would say labor-intensive accountability journalism, especially at the local level. Now, why is it that this means covering the courthouse, covering the State House? Why is it that would be somehow impervious to a lot of these other wonderful things that are going on? Well, a couple reasons. One is underlying this business, underlying the challenge that we have right now is a collapse of the advertising-based business model for news. And even though I have been among those who've criticized, traditional journalists for not, adapting quickly, that isn't actually the main reason for this problem. Even if journalists had adapted really quickly and come up with interesting digital storytelling techniques, there still would have been a collapse because the advertising model collapsed. So the dollar that used to go into content creation of print, TV, and magazines, when it moved online, it didn't move to the online versions of content. It didn't go from analog content to digital content. It went from analog content to Google and analog content to Facebook. So actually only a small percentage of the money of advertising money online goes to content creators. And as a result of this and the massive amount of volume that there is, the amount of ad revenue you can generate from a particular article, if you think of it in terms of almost a revenue per article basis, has gone way down online. Now, the good news is that some entities have gotten so good at engaging users on a national level, and to put it in economic terms, they've gotten it so the cost per page view, like how much it costs to generate 1 million page views, has gotten really low. So they've been able, so Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, people like that, have been able to outrun the drop in ad rates. But you can't do that on a local level because you're limited by the size of the city. There's just only so many people there. So when you combine the limits of scale from being in a city with the most labor-intensive parts of what the local community does, then that's where you have your real problem. So I'm not sure exactly how to express this, but I'm both deliriously optimistic and very worried at the same time.